The story begins by introducing Liu Chunhei, a young man born with cerebral palsy. Despite this setback, Chunhei has never let his condition define him. While his body often spasms and his face carry a slight asymmetry, his mind is sharp and his intelligence unmatched. Despite the daily challenges, Chunhei excels academically, scoring far beyond the passing grade of the university entrance exam. His grandmother, thrilled by the news, decides to celebrate by hosting a dinner with her friends from the choir. When the elderly guests hear about Chunhei's achievement, they're taken aback. They've always linked cerebral palsy with intellectual disability, and their surprise is palpable. Chunhei, used to these kinds of misconceptions, brushes it off with a quiet smile. As the evening progresses, Chunhei faces another challenge: blowing out the candles on his cake. What should be a simple task becomes a struggle, his condition making the action harder than expected. The crowd watches, unsure how to react. Even drinking beer proves difficult. He has to use a straw, and still, he struggles to sip. The stares feel heavier now. But then, as he chokes slightly on his drink, his grandmother is quick to intervene. A gentle pat on his back, and she makes sure he's okay. This is Chunhei's first time drinking, and it doesn't take long before he's tipsy. His grandmother, ever so patient, along with her friends, helps him home. The celebration is over, but the weight of the awkwardness lingers. When they arrive home, Chunhei's grandmother is hit with a new problem. If Chunhei's mother finds out he had alcohol, the situation will surely explode. And as expected, his mother is furious. The grandmother, who has raised Chunhei since childhood, feels a wave of frustration. All these years of care and love, and yet she's met with nothing but anger. The argument between the two women intensifies, old wounds reopening, revealing long-buried resentments. The past, filled with painful memories, threatens to tear them apart. But for Chunhei's sake, they struggle to keep it together. The next morning before leaving for work, Chunhei's mother lays down a strict plan for the day: exercise routines, books to read, all meticulously organized. She even hands the grandmother a detailed list of instructions on how to manage Chunhei's time. The grandmother agrees with a smile, nodding dutifully. But once the door shuts behind his mother, the grandmother's stern face melts away. She gives Chunhei the freedom to do whatever he pleases, letting him slip away from the rigid schedule. Determined to follow his dream, Chunhei decides to leave the house and apply for a teaching job at a local training center. Teaching has always been his passion. Even when he took the university entrance exam, he chose an education major, much to his mother's disapproval. She insisted he retake the exam and pick something more practical. Not wanting to openly defy her, Chunhei sneaks off to teach his first trial class. But things quickly take a turn. The children, with their innocent curiosity, stare at him awkwardly, some whispering and making hurtful remarks. After the class, the head of the institution offers some praise for his teaching skills, but then, with a gentle smile, declines his application. Concerns over the children's mental well-being as the main reason. It's a rejection, masked in politeness, but it stings nonetheless. Chunhei's grandmother, trying to lift his spirits, assures him that his teaching was flawless and that the institution simply failed to see his talent. But before she can say more, an old friend calls out to her, pulling her attention away. Chunhei's grandmother wasn't just focused on caring for him, she had her own life too. One of her passions was being part of a senior choir. However, with their limited abilities, their performances rarely attracted an audience. One day, Lao Diao, a member of the choir, proposed offering rice, flour, and oil as incentives to draw in more people. But the rest of the group quickly shut down the idea. Frustrated by the rejection, Lao Diao threatened to leave the choir. At first, Chunhei's grandmother didn't take it seriously, but then something unexpected happened. She received a private message from a management agency that had seen one of their performance videos. They wanted to offer the choir a tour, but there was a catch: they needed a drummer. Desperate, the choir members tried to convince Lao Diao to return or find a replacement. That's when Chunhei's grandmother had an idea, asking her grandson for help. But Chunhei was quick to refuse. He had never played the drums before. However, Chunhei's grandmother wasn't giving up. With a sly smile, she reminded him that he had played the drums in kindergarten. As Chunhei and his grandmother were talking, a woman with a small child boarded the bus. In a moment of kindness, Chunhei attempted to offer his seat, but lost his balance and fell to the floor. The bus driver, startled by the fall, helped him up but remarked that someone with Chunhei's condition shouldn't be using public transport. The comment stung deeply, and Chunhei's grandmother, furious, immediately confronted the driver. However, the other passengers seemed more annoyed by the delay than concerned with the situation. When they finally made it home, Chunhei was determined to write a complaint letter to the bus company, his frustration driving him to take action. His grandmother, dismissing it as a waste of time, tried to talk him out of it, but Chunhei, resolute in his decision, insisted on following through. Eventually, his grandmother relented, but her attention quickly shifted back to her own plan, getting Chunhei to play the drums in the choir, even though it meant disrupting the carefully crafted schedule his mother had planned for his studies. As she focused on her goal, she imparted a lesson to Chunhei. Sometimes a man, especially an adult, must lie to get what he wants. Chunhei understood, and despite his physical struggles, he joined the choir. But even that presented its own challenges. Chunhei's condition made it difficult to even hold the drumsticks, and during one practice, an elderly woman mocked him, dismissing the idea of using someone with a disability to play the drums as a waste of time. As the woman's harsh words hung in the air, Chunhei's grandmother immediately leaped to his defense, arguing with the stranger. Chunhei, however, sat there confused and unsure of how to respond. Just as the tension seemed to settle, a frisbee landed at his feet. He looked up to find a beautiful girl standing a few feet away, waving her hand, asking for the frisbee back. For most, it would have been a simple gesture, but for Chunhei, it was nearly impossible. He didn't move at first, unsure of how to react. The girl, seeing his hesitation, jogged over to retrieve the frisbee herself. As she got closer, her gaze fell on Chunhei, noticing the difference in him. But instead of surprise or disgust, she smiled gently, a warm and understanding expression that cut straight to his heart. That smile lingered with him long after she had gone. A few days later, Lao Diao, the former drummer, returned, restless and ready to mock Chunhei again. But this time, the elderly woman who had once ridiculed him now stood in his defense. Despite her support, Lao Diao continued his taunts, relentlessly belittling Chunhei. But for some reason, it didn't hurt as much this time. Chunhei was no stranger to being looked down upon, so at first he remained silent, letting the insults roll off his back. But the beautiful girl who had smiled at him kept coming around. Each time she saw him being ridiculed, her face would show clear anger, a silent but powerful support. Encouraged by her unwavering presence, Chunhei found the strength to fight back. With all his energy, he picked up the drumsticks and challenged Lao Diao. The competition was intense, but in the end, it ended in a draw. The crowd's perception of Chunhei began to shift. For the first time, they saw him differently. Finally, the group decided to give the drummer another chance to practice with the band, and they would vote on who would perform. But for Chunhei, the real victory came when he saw Yaya, the girl, jumping with joy, her pride in him clear for everyone to see. A few days later, Chunhei found himself standing by the sink alone with Yaya. It was the perfect moment. She smiled and introduced herself, telling him how much she enjoyed watching him play the drums. Then she asked for his phone number. But Chunhei felt a pang of awkwardness. He didn't have a phone. The moment passed, and with it, a quiet regret lingered. Back home, Chunhei couldn't shake the thought of Yaya. She lingered in his mind, even invading his dreams. In the dream, he was healthy, able to run freely, chasing after her. She smiled, holding a torch that suddenly turned into fireworks, bursting in the night sky. Yaya laughed, praising him for his running skills. Feeling bold, Chunhei boasted that he could do a somersault. He flipped, landing perfectly, and to his surprise, Yaya seemed genuinely amazed. She lunged at him playfully, pulling him onto the grass. Just as the moment seemed to shift, Chunhei snapped awake, his heart racing. The reality hit hard. He'd had a wet dream. Panic surged through him. With his grandmother in the next room, Chunhei quickly shoved the sheets into the laundry, trying to hide his embarrassment. As the machine whirred, an idea began to take shape. He wasn't going to sit idle. He would find a part-time job, anything. Even if it meant waiting tables, he would work to earn money, not for fun, but to keep his dream of continuing his education alive. To support Chunhei's dream, his grandmother gave him an old phone so he could connect with the outside world. With renewed determination, Chunhei went for an interview at a local restaurant for a waiter position. But the manager, sizing him up, looked at him with doubt. Given Chunhei's condition, the manager needed to be sure he could handle the job. Undeterred, Chunhei steeled himself and walked unsteadily across the room, listing the menu items as best as he could. His awkwardness only made the customers chuckle, and from outside, his grandmother watched through the window, her heart sinking. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Despite his best effort, the manager told him that he only hired regular people. But Chunhei wasn't about to back down. He firmly replied that he is just as ordinary as anyone else, with an extraordinary memory. As Chunhei left the cafe, his grandmother rushed to comfort him. But this time, he didn't need it. He had made his mark. He had gotten the job. His grandmother, overwhelmed with joy, hugged him tightly. For Chunhei, it wasn't about the money. It was about proving to himself that he had value. From that day on, Chunhei worked part-time at the cafe, his days split between serving customers and practicing the drums. With his first paycheck of just over 1,000 yuan, he felt a sense of pride. He was finally useful. His skills with making coffee improved steadily, and in between drum sessions, he'd help customers who struggled with their phones. Little by little, his life was starting to find its rhythm. Then came the day he invited Yaya over to his house. Nervous but excited, he recited a poem he'd written just for her. "You are the morning star, rising high in the sky, while I am the odd one navigating the lonely river." But Yaya didn't seem moved by the words. Instead, she casually asked if Chunhei could get an erection. Chunhei froze, heat rushing to his face. Silence fell between them, and Yaya's laughter only deepened the awkwardness. Unsure how to break the tension, Chunhei reached out to touch her face. To his surprise, she didn't pull away. In fact, she gently guided his hand, leading it to her chest. In that moment, Chunhei proved something to himself. He was just like any other 20-year-old man, capable of experiencing what others did. Yaya, caught off guard, tried to leave, but Chunhei stopped her. He thanked her, his voice soft but genuine. At least she saw him as a person, not defined by his disability. Before the tension could settle, the door slammed open. Chunhei's mother walked in, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. She immediately demanded to know what they were doing. Her anger flared, and she raged against Chunhei's decision to work part-time. She couldn't accept the fact that he still wanted to pursue his education at teacher's college. Even worse, she added that it's hard enough for normal people to get accepted. So why anyone accept someone like Chunhei? At that moment, Chunhei paused, the weight of her words sinking in. After a long silence, he finally spoke, his voice steady but filled with a quiet fury. "I didn't ask to be born like this." The room went cold. His words hung in the air, sharp and cutting, leaving no room for argument. Overcome with emotion, Chunhei stormed up to the roof, seeking solace in the cool night air. Alone, he wanted to call the university to hear if there was any chance of him being accepted. But it was too late. The staff had gone home. His mother left soon after, and the house fell into an eerie silence. Chunhei, lost in his thoughts, was left with only loneliness and confusion swirling in his mind. Chunhei sat in silence, absorbed in his thoughts, as his grandmother came to sit beside him. He didn't blame his mother. There were no words of anger or regret. Instead, he quietly shared his desire to get a driver's license. His grandmother understood immediately. It wasn't just about driving. It was about leaving. He wanted to get as far away from this place as he could. Without protest, she agreed to take him for the driving test, accepting his wish with the quiet understanding of someone who had seen the weight of his dreams. A few days later, on the day of the vote for the drummer, Chunhei's life shifted again. Lao Diao suddenly fell ill and had to be rushed to the hospital. As the situation unfolded, Chunhei's grandmother received a phone call from Lao Diao's child, followed by another from her own daughter, who had just given birth. After keeping the secret for so long, Chunhei's grandmother finally decided to share the truth. She told him that he would soon be an older brother. Chunhei's face betrayed the weight of the moment. A subtle expression of disappointment and sadness crossed his features as he lowered his head. He had suspected this for a while, especially after his mother's return home with a noticeably rounded belly. Though he wasn't foolish, he hadn't wanted to believe it. His grandmother, sensing the quiet pain in him, gently offered to take him to the hospital to see his mother. He didn't respond, but simply stood up and followed her, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words and unprocessed emotions. At the hospital, Chunhei saw his mother, pale and weary from giving birth prematurely. The family crowded around her, helping her with even the smallest tasks, like getting to the bathroom. Chunhei's gaze drifted to the crib, where his newborn sister lay, perfect and healthy, free from any defects. As he approached, eager to play with the baby, his mother's reaction was swift and sharp. She pushed him away, clutching the baby tightly in her arms. The hurt in Chunhei's chest was immediate and deep, a quiet sting that lingered long after. On the way home, Chunhei's mind raced with questions. He turned to his grandmother, unable to keep them inside. He wanted to know why no one had told him about his mother's pregnancy. His grandmother explained that his mother had gestational diabetes and was at risk of miscarriage, which is why she had been hospitalized. The pregnancy had been uncertain, and they had chosen not to tell Chunhei because of the fear that the baby might not survive. But Chunhei could feel the weight of something unspoken. He knew the explanation was only part of the truth. There was something deeper his grandmother wasn't revealing. He realized with a growing sense of clarity that his mother's decision to have another child wasn't about wanting a second baby, it was about him. His mother had chosen to risk her life for a second child because she saw him, her firstborn, as imperfect, as a disabled child who couldn't live up to her expectations. Chunhei couldn't shake the memory of his mother's harsh words. At the time, he hadn't known she was pregnant, but the unfamiliar, resentful expression on her face had stuck with him, haunting him ever since. He wondered if their argument had somehow triggered her premature labor, but the thought only tangled his mind further, adding to the growing confusion and chaos in his family. At work, things were going smoothly, but Chunhei couldn't shake the feeling that he was being used. The cafe where he worked recorded him for a charity ad, showcasing him as part of their diverse staff. At one moment, his coworkers whispered behind his back, making cruel comments that he had only been hired for the tax discounts the cafe received by employing someone with a disability. As the days went on, Chunhei finally understood the truth behind his hiring. The realization weighed heavily on him, sinking him into a deep despair. In search of comfort, he reached out to Yaya, hoping for a moment of connection. She agreed to meet, but when he tried to take her hand, she pulled away, saying she needed to use the restroom. As she turned to leave, she waved him off, and in that simple gesture, Chunhei knew they wouldn't meet again. Later, Chunhei went to the museum alone, a quiet escape where he finally finished the poem he'd been working on for weeks. The words had flowed out of him as he wandered through the exhibits, but by the time he left, the weight of everything still pressed down on him. On his way home, he stopped to make a small gesture, offering some candy he had made himself to his grandmother, asking her to pass it on to his mother. But his grandmother refused, explaining that his mother's blood sugar was still unstable. That small act of rejection was all it took to break him. The day's sadness, everything that had built up, crashed down on Chunhei. As his grandmother went to the kitchen to cook, Chunhei, in a haze of despair, began shoving the candy into his mouth, one piece after another, mindlessly. He choked, but didn't stop, stuffing more and more into his mouth, as if he could eat away the pain. In the blur of his fading consciousness, Chunhei saw the little cat he had cared for all these years. He remembered the quiet companionship, the moments of comfort it had given him. But the cat was gone now, its presence slipping away, just like everything else in his life. He thought back to his childhood, the times when he and the cat would play and hide inside an old suitcase. When his parents couldn't find him, they would sit, uncertain and silent, wondering if their lives would have been better if they hadn't had Chunhei. When Chunhei finally regained consciousness, he found himself in a sterile hospital room. His mother sat beside his bed, tears streaming down her face. She was apologizing, her voice thick with regret, as she revealed something she had kept buried for all these years. She told him that when she gave birth to him, she had tried her best, but the doctors had accused her of not knowing how to push. From that moment on, a deep sense of guilt had consumed her, as she believed that his condition was somehow her fault. This guilt weighed so heavily on her that she never once celebrated his birthday. She continued, explaining that when she had pushed him away earlier, it wasn't out of hatred, but out of fear. Fear that she might fail again. It was, she said, her last chance to be a mother. Chunhei, hearing this confession, felt a rush of confusion. He couldn't blame her. She had given him life, only wanting a healthy, normal child. The fault, it seemed, wasn't with his mother. It was with him, the child who had been seen as a mistake. After receiving treatment, Chunhei recovered and was discharged from the hospital. His grandmother, ever supportive, took him to the Guanggong temple, her words echoing in his mind. Every obstacle in life can be overcome. That night, Chunhei dreamt of Yaya. In the dream, he saw himself as a cricket, enduring pain and shedding his old skin to be reborn. Yaya was there, gently helping him peel away the layers, and together they embraced, as two souls united in a moment of renewal. When Chunhei woke, the dream lingered, heavy with meaning. As he spoke to his grandmother, something on her neck caught his eye, a scar. Curious, he asked about it. For the first time, his grandmother opened up, sharing a story she had kept hidden for years. She told him of a time when she had opened a restaurant in Tibet. One day, while counting money, she was held at knife point. But she didn't back down. She fought for her life, not for herself, but for the money she needed to buy baby formula for her daughter, Chunhei's mother. In the struggle, his grandmother was wounded, but she survived. Yet she never shared the full truth with Chunhei's mother. His mother had always believed her grandmother had abandoned her, but the reality was far more painful. His grandmother had endured silently, never speaking of the deep sacrifices she made. At just 21, his grandmother had given birth to her daughter, but shortly after, her husband disappeared. Alone, she worked far from home, providing for them both while missing out on raising her child. The distance between them grew, but the sacrifices were never spoken of. With quiet sincerity, his grandmother turned to Chunhei, her eyes filled with regret. She asked him not to blame his mother, to understand that in many ways she herself had failed. She hadn't known how to teach her daughter to love like a mother, and in turn, his mother struggled to learn how to be a good mother herself. The cycle of pain and silence had trapped them all. Chunhei, now with a deeper understanding of his family's struggles, looked at his grandmother and quietly acknowledged her goodness. Yet, a lingering question remained in his mind. Would his little sister want a brother like him? His grandmother didn't offer an answer. Both of them knew the truth, but it was a truth neither of them could put into words. Life, however, had to go on. Several days later, they traveled to Shinan for a performance, but it didn't take long for Chunhei's grandmother to realize it was a scam. Fortunately, they managed to avoid financial loss, but the sting of the deception remained. On the same day, Chunhei received a letter from the public transportation company that managed the buses. His complaint had made an impact. The company had called a meeting to apologize, presenting Chunhei with 3 sacks of rice, flour, and oil as compensation. They even invited him to speak on stage, an unexpected recognition that left him quietly humbled. As Chunhei stood on the stage, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had once again become the object of pity for a room full of strangers. But despite the weight of their gazes, he pressed on, determined to express his truth. No matter how small or broken he sometimes felt, he was still a whole person, deserving of respect and dignity. After the event, something shifted. Chunhei's relationship with his family began to improve. They made dumplings together, laughing and sharing stories. Chunhei even stepped into the role of older brother, helping care for his little sister. He took a driving lesson, and before long, he had his driver's license, ready to take his grandmother out for walks, showing her the world beyond their home. He told her with newfound conviction that from now on, he wanted to live his own way. Days later, Chunhei scattered the ashes of his pet cat. It felt like a quiet release, a way of letting go of the past, though he couldn't quite explain why it mattered so much. One thing was clear, he had moved forward, and with that, the story quietly drew to a close. So the moral of the story is, life may not always give you the perfect rhythm, but with a little perseverance, a drumstick, and a grandmother who's willing to bend the rules, you can still make some noise. Just don't forget, sometimes it's not about the drumsticks, but who's cheering you on from the sidelines.